In episode 12, it's time to go over escape room obituaries. Wednesday, everybody listening. Thank you for tuning in to the Mystery Ship Transmissions podcast. My name is Derek, aka Sugi, and today we're going over escape room obituaries. We're talking about escape rooms that are no longer with us. All of them are going to be in LA, and this is just a way to acknowledge the fact that there were a few escape rooms out there, and though this is a very new industry, some businesses are either failing or changing or making differences to their escape rooms to either make it better or just to kind of maybe use this as something to learn from these past escape rooms, whether they were mistakes or things that they did good, things to acknowledge. So today we're going to be talking about 3 escape rooms all within the greater Los Angeles area. The 3 rooms we'll be going over today is Tiki Palace by Countdown, The Scarlet Killer by Captured LA, and Sanatorium by Escape Hotel. We're going to have some talking points when going over these rooms. 3 of them are going to be this. We're going to be talking about the basic details of the escape room, whether it's the story, where it's located. We'll be going over the pros and cons of these escape rooms, and we'll be going over why they may have not lasted, or the reason why they may have not lasted. So if that's all clear and you are ready to go, let's dive in. Let's start with Tiki Palace. Now, Tiki Palace had you and your group on a new island resort located on a sacred volcano. The day that your group arrives is the same time that the construction team had somehow disrupted and angered the gods. So you only had 1 hour to complete tasks and solve puzzles to acknowledge and satisfy the gods to give you and your group enough time to escape the island. Countdown in the past year has actually changed their name and joined with a big escape room company well known in the LA area known as 60 Out, with the building being in the same location. It's located on the 110 freeway near downtown LA. The price of the escape room was $40 per person, which would give you a slight discount if you brought more people with you in your individual group when booking. The room held 2 to 10 people, and it was not a private booking room, which means that you could end up being grouped with strangers. So going over into the pros of this escape room, it was a very good beginner room. A lot of the puzzles in this room were pretty basic, not a lot of technology, somewhere between first and second generation when it comes to the room itself. Very good for beginners, nothing too intimidating. Another pro that this room also had was that it had a side puzzle, which is something that a few escape rooms nowadays still try to utilize. It's a cool idea. It's basically a puzzle that has nothing to do with the main subject or the main structure of the game. But if you have time and you could go into that puzzle, solve it before you leave the room, you could get a special prize. And I believe the prizes that they had were you would be able to pull out of this mailbox or these drawers, and inside the drawers either had like a free t-shirt or a gift card for escape games there or stuff like that. Very, very cool. Also, the story was pretty original. There's not many escape rooms out there who have utilized the island theme, especially something like this. Just because it's original doesn't mean that it's super good or that it works for an escape room. Yes and no. It's not a very clear cut. I wouldn't say that it was a super strong story, but it was original nonetheless. Now for the cons of this escape room, it was a small space. It definitely made use for the room that it had. and it was good for beginners, but it was a small space and there wasn't really a lot there puzzle wise. It was practical stuff and it worked. Small spaces don't always make for the greatest escape rooms, and if you're able to utilize a small space, then that is props to you for being able to do that. It tends to kind of take you out a little bit. And the other thing too was that this room wasn't really that memorable. I mean, it's been a while since I did this room, and it doesn't really, there wasn't many things in that escape room that stuck out in my mind. And that might be in part to the fact that the standards of escape rooms nowadays are definitely higher. Between that first and second generation, meaning that the technology utilized in this room was a little bit more behind. Sometimes that works for certain themes, but in this case, there was a lot more potential for it to grow, but obviously it didn't get to live to that potential. Now, why didn't it last? After the name change and merging with 60 Out, it seemed that perhaps the standards were not quite up to par to what 60 Out was doing, because there really was some basic tech in the room to be considered between, like I said, between the first and second generation room. There were 3 rooms at the time of Countdown, which included Tiki Palace, which I believe the other one was called Pandora. And then another room called Krampus, which is actually still playable to this day. 60 Out kept Krampus, and that is the only room at that location that is still up and running. I haven't done Krampus. From what I hear, it is a very entertaining room. I guess it really didn't hold up to the standard 60 Out had. So moving on, let's go over the Scarlet Killer by Captured LA. Scarlet Killer was based on a LA noir time period. You and your team are models, or they kind of in the story designate you as a model, but you're a big group, so try to ignore that. I know it doesn't quite make sense, but that's just how they made it. And you're trying to make it here in Los Angeles or in Hollywood. And you end up meeting an agent. You find yourself trapped in an apartment of the agent, who happens to be an infamous serial killer. You had 1 hour to escape before the killer came back. And the room held 2 to 8 people with a price of $25 per person. And there were also private bookings. Now, the pros of this room, real strong point of this escape room was that it had wonderful decor. The dingy kind of feel and look of an apartment of maybe that time period. A lot of wood around the area. They had an old-timey radio that was playing, which actually helped give a clue. Periodically over time it would play. They had windows in the room, and it had this like rain and thunder kind of sound to it, which was very, very cool because the inside of the lights, the bulbs, would actually have this flicker. You would have this added element of difficulty when you're trying to read something, and the lights would kind of go out for a second and then turn back on. It gave you a little bit of a call to action. That was very cool. Also, it had a good variety of puzzles, things that involved maze stuff, which key would be in a pipe and you had to guide the magnet across. They had things like lottery tickets that collaborated to help unlock a padlock. Hanging pictures onto the wall, which had magnets on the back, which would open up a secret hatch somewhere. Utilizing the radio. A lot of scavenging in this game from what I remember. So a good variety of puzzles. And you can't argue with the price of this escape room, which is on the lower end, more price point, $25 per person. Can't argue with that. For the cons, again, another smaller room. One for a group to be able to utilize their space as much as they can, but the room was a bit smaller. Maybe would have been a little cooler if they just maybe added a little extra something to it. Thing that hurt it the most was probably the location of the actual business. It was in the heart of Los Angeles, but it was inside of this business building. There was no sign to it. You really couldn't tell. You really had to Yelp or really know where you were going to in order to find this place. And even when we were in the lobby, it was kind of, my group and I were looking at each other and we're like, I don't know if we're in the right place, but it was very tucked away. You had to kind of go around corners and eventually you would find it. And it didn't really have good parking either. It was street parking. So if you went during the week, maybe you had a good chance, but weekends were pretty much like a no-go. So why didn't it last? Captured LA had a lot of production value, which may have put them in the hole financially. Also, considering how inexpensive they were charging people, may have contributed to why it wasn't able to last as a business. The staff was very friendly, but guys, as I stated in the cons, the location was pretty inconvenient. All right, moving on to the last escape room. We're talking about Sanatorium by Escape Hotel. You've just been booked into a room which takes you to a place called Edwin Hills Sanatorium, which has been closed down for some time now. But there are still a few souls of the residents that haunt these quarters. It's time for your group to release the trapped souls before you find yourself losing your sanity and becoming a permanent resident. You had 90 minutes to complete the task. The room held 1 to 12 players and was not a private booking room. The cost of this room, from what I remember, was somewhere between $50 to $65 to do this escape room. Definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. Now, Escape Hotel is located right on Hollywood Boulevard, right down the street from El Capitan, the Man Chinese Theater. Lots of foot traffic coming through that area. The pros of this room. The big thing about this room was that it was everything that you knew before going into the escape room. The room itself was designated as, difficulty-wise, was designated as their hardest escape room at Escape Hotel, which Escape Hotel has about 6 or 7 rooms at the moment. To have the most difficult room was already putting it up on a pedestal. The room itself had several different rooms you had to go through in this escape room, which is pretty crazy, and once again, another thing to intimidate you. Also, they had a live actor in the room, which also may have contributed to why the cost of this room was more expensive. Once again, another thing to go, oh, that's another intimidate. This room was all about intimidating you almost. And the fact that this room was also located in the basement of this building, which added a nice scare factor to it. The other pro to this room was there was some fun use of technology in this escape room. It was very clever, very fun, but also has a drawback, which is a great guide into some of the cons. But before we go there, the technology in this room is somewhere between the second generation to the third generation. So there are a few things that have some technology, TV screens built into it, whether it's for actual puzzles themselves or cinematics. It had a pretty spooky feeling to it. So good, fun use of technology. Now, the cons of this escape room for the use of technology is we have to acknowledge the fact that this escape room wasn't necessarily always sanatorium. This room was actually known as the Exorcist Room at one time and was actually a marketing for a Fox television series with the same name based off of the old Exorcist movie. So the room was actually centered around this church exorcism theme, and you could tell that a lot of those themes are still utilized in that room, which either kind of made sense or was kind of a reach at times. So the decor kind of didn't really work. There was even a part where there was a bed in the room and you saw this kind of doll or body sitting underneath the sheet. And once you completed this puzzle, like putting bottles over certain areas on a table that had markings, all of a sudden like noise would happen and then the body would rise with the sheet over it. Okay, yeah, that works for exorcism, but it doesn't really quite work for sanatorium, considering that nobody lives or is still in this place anymore. So yeah, it was a reach. Yeah, decor wise was a bit of a con there. The puzzles themselves, there was a good variety of them. A lot of them were kind of time burners, which for 90-minute rooms tends to be a pretty consistent thing that happens, because obviously, for those who don't know what time burners are, these are what it sounds like. These are puzzles that are much more about rearranging and finding a pattern that is going to take some trial and error more than it is using more of your wit and understanding the clue or how the puzzle works, or scavenging. This one's a lot more of trial and error, which for some people I'm not a super big fan. Once in a while is okay, but in this case there was just one after another and it kind of wore thin. That kind of stuff is more the stuff that takes away the memorable cinematics than it does the actual puzzle, the focus on that. So puzzles were a bit of a thing that we ended up focusing on. And the price was maybe the con that really came into play too, because it is such an expensive escape room that it may have drawn away people from doing this room in the first place. Now, why didn't it last? Like I said, Escape Hotel is located right on Hollywood Boulevard with tons and tons of foot traffic coming through, with many people stumbling in, mostly as first-timers. The sanatorium was the most expensive room, obviously, and was the most intimidating room. So many of the times, the people who would come into this place for the first time or just kind of stumble across and want to play, they were usually directed away from this escape room. Maybe something that people would come back to eventually, but with so much foot traffic in Hollywood, maybe some of the enthusiasts not being as enthusiastic or wanting to do this room as much maybe hurt the fact that that room wasn't booked as much as maybe they would want to. The story with Sanatorium is they actually eventually closed Sanatorium to make way to lay out a partnership with the latest Tomb Raider movie, and which is actually available to book now. You can go check it out. And this is actually not the first time that Escape Hotel has partnered with the Hollywood industry, the movie industry, or television industry. They've also, like I said, at one time, Sanatorium was actually used as a market for the Exorcist television show, and also another escape room there, which is known as Espionage, was actually used for the movie with starring Tom Cruise, which is Jack Reacher. And you can actually see remnants of the sticker that had the Jack Reacher and telling you the movie over on the wall where you take a picture after you do an escape room. The maybe thing that why it didn't last was in part because they were making room for a partnership to market the latest Tomb Raider film. So once again, for the last time, we went over 3 escape rooms, going over the ones that are no longer with us. Once again, Tiki Palace by Countdown, also The Scarlet Killer by Captured LA, and Sanatorium by Escape Hotel. May you all rest in peace. Okay, with that said, we are done with our Escape Obituaries. For next week's episode, next Wednesday, there will be no podcast. I repeat, next Wednesday, there will be no podcast. But what I want the listeners to do is please come by the YouTube channel, where we'll be actually debuting a preview of a review video. We already have a preview video of Dr. Psycho by 60 out. Next Wednesday, we'll be publishing the Magic Kingdom review by Maze Rooms Los Angeles, LA. Our review of it check it out. Next Wednesday, we'll be debuting it. Okay? And we'll be back with the podcast the following Wednesday with an escape room review of Bad Blood by Escape LBC. Or I hope you guys enjoyed this segment. To check in next Wednesday on YouTube, and also check in for the following Wednesday when we do a review on Bad Blood. So until next time from the Mystery Ship, challenge yourself, have fun, and escape well.